Hello YouTube, Dave here again. I'm recording this at night because there's a chance that there's going to be some bad weather tomorrow, meaning that there's probably going to be no school, which means there's going to be kids at home, which means I won't get a chance to record a video. So, leg's a little bit off, and I apologize for that, but I'll just make this sort of quick and just answer another viewer question. So I've had people ask me about different aspects of the game, like alignment or, hit dice, healing, things like that. But one of the questions that I got that I never really got a chance to really answer all that thoroughly was, what are my thoughts on multiclassing? Particularly with the D20 system, and I'll go over the differences in AD&D multiclassing versus current multiclassing in a moment, but I just like to say that I'm not a huge fan of multiclassing in the D20 versions of Dungeons & Dragons, particularly 3rd edition and 5th edition. 4th edition didn't really have multiclassing in the traditional sense, but you could take feats that gave you access to class features of other classes. So they didn't have like multiclassing the way that we have it here now. You had your primary class, and then you could multiclass by taking feats, and those feats would grant you abilities from those other classes. Like, so if you wanted to have some spellcasting ability, you took the feat, and I think you gained a couple of 0-level or cantrips or at-will powers, and then you could take like an encounter, or you could cast, I think it was an encounter as a daily or something like that. It's been a while since I looked at that. But when it comes to like 3rd edition and 5th edition, the way that you multiclass is all the classes gain levels at the same experience point values. So when you gained enough experience to go from one level to the next, instead of taking the next level of the class that you were in, you could opt to take a level of a different class. So for example, if you were a fighter and you wanted to multiclass into maybe say cleric, then when you gained, and you were like 4th level fighter, when you gained 5th level, you could take 1st level of cleric and be a 4th level fighter, 1st level cleric. 3rd edition did have some caveats when it came to multiclassing, in that you couldn't get too wild with how you did it. So you could take multiple classes, but each one that you took had to be within a certain number of levels of each other. So you'd have your favorite class. So for example, the elf had wizard. So if you had an elven wizard, their wizard levels didn't count towards the gaps between multi-class levels. And if you took 3 levels of wizard, or say you took 5 levels of wizard, you took 3 levels or 4 levels of say fighter, and then you took 1 level of rogue, because your fighter level and your rogue levels were so different, like instead of having just 1 level in between, meaning that you should have gone like, up to your wizard levels and then take fighter rogue sort of thing, because you kind of front loaded it, then you would incur an experience point penalty. And I think it was like 20% experience penalty until you got your levels sort of closer to the point where they were within 1 of each other. So that's how it worked back then. And with 5th edition, as far as I know, and not very many people have actually done this in any of the games that I've run. In fact, I don't think I've had a single player actually multiclass in a 5th edition game that I've run. But you just take like the level of the class, and that's it. Like, you just, there's no worries about like level disparities or anything like that. You just take the level of that class. So I don't like that, because a lot of times it's something that gets done to gain mechanical advantages, in terms of trying to increase the amount of damage you deal, or increase the amount of defense that you might have, or just all these different things. But it's not often, I'm not saying that it's always the case, but a lot of times it's not really explained through proper role-playing or story progression. For the most part, I just never multiclassed. I only did multiclassing one time that I can think of, except for there were times when I wanted to be an arcane archer in 3rd edition. So for that, you had to be able to cast, you had to have certain feats, and you had to be able to cast at least a 1st level spell. So I had to take a level of, like, I think I took sorcerer and fighter, just so I can become part of that class. And that's a whole other thing which I can talk about in a different video. But the only other time beyond that that I've multiclassed was in the campaign where I played a dwarven rogue, and the concept was I wanted to be a treasure hunter. So I wasn't like a stealthy, sneaky, swindler type of character. I wasn't gonna sneak up on people and pick their pockets, or, do well at bluffing. My skills were all about dungeoneering, finding traps and disabling them, and appraising the value of the items that you found. And I thought it was kind of a cool concept, and I really liked that idea. The issue is that the dungeon master, for better or for worse, didn't like to do things in what you consider to be a normal sort of way. So when it came to placing traps, instead of placing a trap, say, on a chest, they might place it on a set of squares, 10 feet out from the chest. Or instead of it being in an intersection where you might expect it to be, it might be, 10 feet down the hall on, to the west type of thing. So where you'd expect to see traps, you just weren't seeing traps, and then when you weren't expecting them, I just kept stumbling into them. And it started to get kind of frustrating, and the other players would constantly make fun of how ineffective my rogue was, and it started making, me, it annoyed me as a player, but for the character, it just made him angry. So because he was constantly being picked on by the other party members, and because his foray into being this treasure hunter just didn't work out, I basically switched classes into barbarian, and he would just get so enraged by the insults and the jabs that all these other characters would give to me, that I just started, flying into rages and hitting things. But for me, it made sense because there was an actual reason for it. This is what he wanted to do. He failed at what he wanted to do, which is fine, but because of the way that he was treated as a result, it, gave him, this rage. And he didn't change, like I didn't change armor. I kept wearing the same studded leather. I kept using the same equipment. So I didn't want to change anything about it, but just sort of add the barbarian stuff and into it. And I started focusing more on the barbarian levels. But I see a lot of times where you have concepts where it's, take 5 levels of this class, and then take 3 levels of this class with this feat, and then take a level of this class and 2 levels of this class afterwards, and add all these things together. And it's just like, but how does that make sense? Like, if you want to be an 8th level wizard, and then take 3 levels of fighter, and then take, 2 levels of rogue, and then take a level of like cleric, or whatever. It's like, how are you explaining all those things beyond just, well, this is what I want to do right now? So I just find that the justification for how you get this multi-class character doesn't really seem to happen as much as I think it should. And again, I'm not saying that everyone does this, but I see it happening, and I hear of it happening, and I see people talking about their characters like online and on these things, and they just have these like just huge assortment of class levels. And it's just one of those things that it's like, it just doesn't make sense. And for me as a dungeon master, if someone wants to multi-class, it's fine. But it's just like, so explain to me how your character would start gaining these abilities, and that's fine. Like if you start as a fighter and then you want to start, taking levels of wizard, then, it's fine. You could say that, yeah, you were studying, or you were, peeking over the shoulder, or you were, between adventures, you had the wizard companion in your party start teaching you, basic tricks. And that's fine. That makes sense. And if that's how you want to do it, then that's fine. It's not like you have to say from the beginning that this is what I want to do and have all 20 levels of character progression all mapped out with all these different multi-classes and, all that stuff. But when the time comes, it's just, have a reason why you're doing it, in my opinion. So I like sort of the story side of things. I like the role-playing side of things. And I would rather have, so if you had 4 different classes, but you had a good reason as to why you took all 4 of those classes, then that's fine. As long as it makes sense, and as long as you can kind of explain how you've gotten to those points, I'm sort of okay with it. But as a personal preference, I just really wouldn't do it unless I had a pretty valid reason. Now, what I actually like, I hated it at first, and for a long time I hated it. But the more I think about it now, the more I actually like the way that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons handled multiclassing. So with multiclassing in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, it was available to all the demi-human races like elf, dwarf, halfling, gnome, half-orc. It was available to all those races, but it wasn't available to humans. Humans had to do something else. And so what you would do is you would just basically say, I'm starting my character as a fighter magic user, like a fighter wizard, or a rogue cleric, or a cleric fighter, a cleric wizard. But you would have to make that choice at the beginning of your character creation, and you were locked into it. Each of those classes also progress at a different rate, so it wasn't a matter of just taking, cherry picking this class and then taking the other one. You had to split your experience amongst the classes that you had. So if you were a fighter wizard, then you would have to follow the progression charts. So for your hit points, now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. I do like the idea of having it be a decision that's made from the beginning. But where it becomes a little bit more complicated is your things like hit points would be based off of, you would take, if you're a first level fighter, first level wizard, you would, in AD&D, you would roll, but even if you did maximum damage, whatever you had for your starting level fighter hit points, you would divide that by 2. And then whatever you had for your starting first level wizard hit points, you would divide that by 2 and add them together. So if you had 10 hit points as a fighter and 4 hit points as a wizard, you would have 5 hit points from the fighter actually apply to your character, and you would have 2 hit points apply from the wizard class. If you had a high constitution, you would add that to each hit dice, but again, you would divide everything by 2. And I want to say if you had a half point, you would just kind of keep that in mind, but it didn't apply until you got that second half of a point. That would put it up to the next hit point value. So it was complicated, and again, the classes progressed at a different rate. So if you chose like a rogue or a thief wizard, then you would be gaining, like probably, I think you'd be a third level thief long before you became a second level or third level magic user. So there was just like to go from first level or second level rogue, I think was only 1,250 experience points, but to become a second level wizard, you had to have 2,500 experience points. And again, keep in mind, you were dividing them in half. So if you got 100 experience points for an encounter, 50 of it went towards your rogue levels, 50 of it went towards your wizard levels. Humans had what was called dual classing, and dual classing was different because you would essentially give up one class to go into another. My understanding is you would keep your hit points, and you would, I don't think you rolled hit dice or hit points until your level of your new class exceeded the level that you had for your original. So if you became a 5th level fighter and said, I'm going to dual class and become a wizard, I don't think your wizard would roll hit points until they became a 6th level wizard. And I might be a little bit wrong on that one. So if I am, just please correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's the way that it works. You would keep the better THAC0 or attack matrix if it was first edition, and you would keep, I think, the better saving throw progression. But once you dual classed out of something, you can never go back. So again, you had to make that decision, and you were committed to it. So if you gave up being a fighter to start being a wizard, you could never go back to being a fighter again. You could dual class again, I think, into something else, but the same rules would apply. And I don't think you would gain any hit points or anything until you exceeded your highest level at that point. So again, it's really kind of complicated, but I still like the idea behind those, at least the theories behind them, because it meant that you had to make those decisions early on, and once you made them, you were locked into them. And I kind of like that idea a lot better than just saying, well, if I take a level of this class, I get this ability, and when I add this to that ability, it makes me even better. So I'm going to do that. It's like, oh, okay, but how do you take that second class? How did you get there? Well, it doesn't matter. I'll just, it's just, don't worry about that. It's just what I want to do. So those are sort of my thoughts on it. So just to recap, not a huge fan of multiclassing in modern Dungeons & Dragons. The way it was done in AD&D was unnecessarily complicated, but it still required forethought and planning before you actually did anything. And even for the humans, which could freely move from one class to another, they could never look back. So I kind of like that. I like that approach more than just being able to kind of pick and choose as you go. And if I was running a campaign, I would still make my player justify how they gained that other class, those other class features. And it can't just be something simple like, well, I just, trained, and not really, while other things were going on. For certain things it might work, other things it may not. So if you have a wizard in the party and you say I was just, getting tutelage from them, that's fine. That's something that I can accept. If you didn't have a wizard in the party and all of a sudden your fighter starts casting, wizard spells without being the Eldritch Knight, then it's like, well, how did you get those wizard spells? How did you do that? And if you want to plan ahead and just say, I'm thinking of taking classes in this, so in my downtime I want to start studying, that's cool. But I don't like the fact that it can just be easily kind of cherry-picked, and that a lot of, not a lot, but enough people do the cherry-picking just to make an unnecessarily, complicated but broken character, instead of just, trying to make one that would organically fit with the progression of the story that's gone on. So again, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What are your opinions on multiclassing? Are you for it? Do you not really like it? Are you okay with it as long as it makes sense? Or do you just want the players to do whatever as long as they're happy? So let me know in the comments below. I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time.